Ready for your weekly tech fix? Want to know how technology sets us free? Well, get ready because here it comes. You're listening to Sovryn Tech with your host, entrepreneur and technophile Brian Sovryn. He's got a huge brain. And now, here's Brian.
Here I am, the golden stallion of the tech world, here for another great episode of Sovryn Tech, episode number 25. 25 episodes of Sovryn Tech. This has been wonderful so far. We started back, I believe, December of 2012. And this has just been a ton of fun for me. Gotten a lot of great emails from listeners. And great contact with listeners, great interactions, be it through the Google Plus page or whichever avenue you decide to get in touch with me. And it has been so much fun. I cannot begin to tell you how incredible this really has been. So thank you all for listening. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. This is Sovryn Tech, like Dr. Stephanie Murphy, the lovely and hyper-intelligent producer of this show. As you just heard her say, this is a show about how science and technology and how it can set you free. And it is just that. It is how can it set you free? And it talks about, maybe asking questions about science and technology, or just exploring what's going on in the world of science and technology. There's a lot of great podcasts out there. There really are, There's a lot of great technology podcasts out there. There's This Week in Tech. There's plenty of great content out there for science. There's the podcast. There's a Star Talk, the radio show with Neil deGrasse Tyson, and all this stuff is really, really great. But the nice thing that you get with Sovryn Tech is you get that anarchist flavor. You get that, no, yes, please, government, save us kind of nonsense. You get none of that, NASA's the greatest thing we've ever done. You get none of that here. And you also, and this is something we're going to talk about, this is kind of the hot topic of the past couple days. I mean, this is a really, really hot topic. And the topic is something called PRISM. Okay, PRISM, PRISM. And what is PRISM? Let's get right into it. Okay, and you're going to see why at Sovryn Tech, this may be one of the few places where you're going to get a real principled look at what this is. And if you haven't heard about it, I mean, it's all over the place. If you have any kind of social media account, I'm sure you would have heard of it. But this really is all over the place. By the way, I didn't mention this show is on location today. We are on location. So if you hear some pretty wild sounds, again, I will not tell you where we're on location. But if you hear those wild sounds, that's why. And we're using, of course, the usual Blue Yeti microphone, USB microphone, which always does a great job, and we've used on this show in the past and delivers great sound. So here we go. What is PRISM? This is from Gizmodo by Brian Barrett. Great guy. And last night, the Washington Post, this is dated today, which actually this show is getting recorded on the same day that it gets released, which is June 7th, 2013. Last night, the Washington Post and Guardian dropped concurrent bombshell reports. Their subject was PRISM, a covert collaboration between the NSA, FBI, and nearly every tech company you rely on daily. PRISM, PRISM, has allowed the government unprecedented access to your personal information for at least the last 6 years. But what is it exactly? Okay, so this isn't something old. This isn't something new. This is old. As much as PRISM might sound like a comic book antagonist of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's the code name for a very real U.S. government program. According to leaked documents, it went into effect in 2007 and has only gained momentum since. Its stated purpose is to monitor potentially valuable foreign communications that might pass through U.S. servers. But it appears that in practice, its scope was far greater. There's a lot of different charts and everything on this page. It'll be linked to in the show notes, so don't hesitate to check that out. PRISM information, according to the Post, accounts for nearly 1 in 7 intelligence reports. That's staggering. And yes, it is. So essentially, what that is saying is that every 1 in 7 of the intelligence reports that go to the NSA, CIA, whatever, is information that they received from the PRISM program and thus from the pretty much every technology company in at least in the United States. And that gives the NSA unprecedented access to the servers of major tech companies: Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, Paltalk, AOL, Skype, YouTube, Apple. If you've interacted with any of those companies in the last 6 years, that information is vulnerable under PRISM. But how? The initial reports from last night suggested that the process works as follows. The companies mentioned above, and who knows how many others, receive a directive from the Attorney General and Director of National Intelligence. They hand over access to their servers and the tremendous wealth of data and communiques that passes through them every day to the FBI's Data Intercept Technology Unit, which in turn relays it to the NSA. And that's when things get interesting. So, let's see, that agency can spy on unwitting U.S. citizens. It seems impossible that the NSA, an agency which by law is only allowed to monitor foreign communications, has so much access to domestic information. And yet, there are, as you might expect, filters in place to help handle the fire hose of data that comes through daily, the trillions of bits and bytes that make up our online identities and lives. Something to ensure that only the bad guys are being tracked and not honest, everyday citizens. Actually, there's only one filter, and it's ridiculous. An NSA analyst has to have 51% confidence that a subject is foreign. After that, it's carte blanche. That's it. That's the only filter. And it's an ineffective one at that. The PowerPoint slides published by the Post acknowledge that domestic citizens get caught in the web, but that it's nothing to worry about, quote unquote. It is something to worry about. What's most troubling about PRISM isn't that it collects data, it's the type of data it collects. According to the Washington Post report, that includes audio and video chats, photographs, emails, documents, and connection logs. Skype can be monitored for audio when one end of the call is a conventional telephone, and for any combination of audio, video chat, and file transfers when Skype users connect by computer alone. Google's offerings include Gmail, voice and video chat, Google Drive files, photo libraries, and live surveillance of search terms. Did you get all that? Similar depth of access applies to Facebook, Microsoft, and the rest. Now, granted, let's bear this in mind, Skype and Microsoft are one and the same. So if it's going to apply to Microsoft, believe me, it's going to apply to Skype. Just to be clear, this covers practically anything you've ever done online, up to and including Google searches as you type them, which is both different from it, it's more aggressive than the Verizon scandal. And this is going to talk about the Verizon scandal too. The news of PRISM broke soon after a separate report about the NSA's having access to Verizon customer and, according to an NBC report, everyone else's phone logs. Surprisingly enough, this is a totally different program, and PRISM makes the Verizon thing look like an ACLU company picnic by comparison. When the NSA monitors phone records, it reportedly only collects the metadata therein. That includes to and from, whom the calls were made, where the calls came from, and other general info. Importantly, as far as we know, the actual content of the calls was off limits. By contrast, PRISM apparently allows full access not just to the fact that an email or chat was sent, but also the contents of those emails and chats. According to the Washington Post source, they can literally watch you as you type. They could be doing it right now. PRISM's first corporate partner was allegedly Microsoft, well, what a shock, which according to the Post and Guardian signed on back in 2007. Other companies slowly joined, with Apple being the most recent enlistee. Twitter, it seems, has not complied. Now that's interesting because Twitter will comply with governments saying, I want you to take this tweet down in other countries like Saudi Arabia and Australia. But I'm shocked. Now, and also interestingly, and this is making me rethink Twitter a little bit, because if you go to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who I'm sure has a lot to say about this PRISM thing, they actually give Twitter, they're one of the few companies that gets 5 stars. I think they're one of 2 companies that gets 5 stars on their, does this tech company protect its users? And Twitter apparently does, even though, again, I'm shocked because there are definite reports that Twitter will take down posts upon request of the government. But then I guess they're not really giving anything away. They're just taking something down. Does that break freedom of speech? Sure. But then would they ever do that in the United States because that's law? Who knows? Anyway, let's keep going with the article. But I find it very interesting that Twitter has said, screw you. But why would all these companies agree to this? Mostly because they have no choice. Failure to hand over server data leaves them subject to a government lawsuit, which can be expensive and incredibly harmful in less quantifiable ways. Besides, they receive compensation for their services. They're not doing this out of charity. There is incentive to play ball. Here's where things get a little complicated, though. Apple, Microsoft, Yahoo, and Google have all given full-throated denials of any involvement whatsoever. Most of them aren't just PR syntactical trickery either. They are unequivocal. What's most horrifying about PRISM might be that there's nothing technically illegal about it. The government has had this authority for years, and there's no sign that it's going to be revoked anytime soon. A little bit of history might be helpful for context. Back in 2007, mounting public pressure forced the Bush administration to abandon the warrantless surveillance program it had initiated in 2001. Well, abandon might be too strong a word. What the administration actually did was to find it a new home. The Protect America Act of 2007 made it possible for targets to be electronically surveilled without a warrant if they were reasonably believed to be foreign. That's where that 51% comes in. It was followed by the 2008 FISA Amendments Act, which immunized companies from legal harm for collaborating, handing information over to the government. And that's the 1-2 punch that gives PRISM full legal standing. All of which is to say that PRISM is an awful violation of rights, but it's one that's not going to disappear anytime soon. The government is so far completely unapologetic. And why wouldn't they be? It's easy enough to follow the letter of the law when you're the one writing it. Whoa. Okay, now, Brian Barrett is not a libertarian or an anarchist or anything along those lines, but that is one of the most libertarian tech articles I've ever read in my life. And that is the point. It's easy enough to follow the letter of the law when you're the one writing it. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I was very, very, this is very distressing to read, but I was very, very pleased to read for someone to get it. That this is what government can do. Okay? And I want to make a quick point on that. Because there's a lot of people who say, yeah, but look, there's a lot of bad people in the world. There's all these bad people in the world. We need government to keep an eye on these things and to watch these things. You know what? If there's a lot of bad people in the world, and equally, if you're of more religious bent, and you think that people are naturally evil, then the last thing you want to do to any person is give them any kind of power over you. Give them the ability to write laws that can affect you. That is the last thing you'd ever want if everybody's bad. People always say this, that, oh, it's an ideal, you're utopian, you anarchists. You want this ideal society. You can't have it because all these people are bad. No, it's the very reason that if there are so many bad people out there, that's the very reason to never have government. That's crazy talk. To say that because that we need protection. No, that's the reason we don't need protection, so that we can govern ourselves and everybody can be responsible for themselves. And you can't have, somebody who grew up in an abusive home or somebody that had some traumatic life somehow ruin yours. Okay? Anyway, shockingly, a source that a lot of anarcho-capitalists like to go to, which is Forbes magazine, Forbes happens to like PRISM. This is actually, again, from today, from June 7th, 2013. Why NSA's PRISM program makes sense. President Obama's firm defense of the National Security Agency's domestic, quote-unquote, eavesdropping program on Friday should calm some of the more extravagant fears provoked by public disclosure of its existence. I put the word domestic in quotes because the efforts to monitor internet and other communications really isn't about listening in on Americans, or even foreign nationals living here, but rather intercepting suspicious transmissions originating overseas that just happen to be passing through the United States. That is an eminently sensible way of keeping up with terrorists because it is so much easier than tapping into network conduits in other countries or under the seas. Not that we don't do that. In order to grasp the logic of the NSA program, which is codenamed PRISM, you have to understand how the internet is involved. It was a purely American innovation at its inception, with most of the infrastructure concentrated in a few places like Northern Virginia. I live a few miles from where the internet's first big East Coast access point was located, in the parking garage of an office building the near building near the intersection of Virginia Route 7 and 193, an area that some people refer to as Internet Alley, because the World Wide Web grew so haphazardly in its early days, it was common until recently for internet traffic between two European countries to pass through my neighborhood. There are only a few major nodes in the system, and packet switching sends messages through whatever pathway is possible. The Washington Post story on PRISM today has a graphic illustrating my point about how bandwidth tends to be allocated globally. Like a modern version of ancient roads, Rome's Appian Way, all digital roads lead to America. It isn't hard to see why Director of National Intelligence James R. Clapper could say on Thursday that information collected under this program is among the most important and valuable foreign intelligence information we collect. No kidding. PRISM generated an average of 4 items per day for the President's daily intelligence briefing in 2012. The key point to recognize, though, is that this really is foreign intelligence. The architecture of the Internet enables NSA to collect it within U.S. borders, but there is no intention to spy on U.S. citizens. A few elementary algorithms used in narrowing the analysis of traffic should be sufficient to assure that the privacy of American citizens is seldom compromised. Seldom. President Obama stressed in his comments today that safeguards have been put in place to prevent the scope of NSA eavesdropping from expanding beyond its original purpose. I don't want to minimize the dangers to civil liberties associated with such a program. It needs to be monitored closely, which is one reason why Congress has been kept informed about its existence. However, compared with the danger posed by terrorists bent upon destroying America, PRISM presents at worst only modest danger to our liberties. Its main purpose is to protect those liberties, not subvert them. Wait a minute. What does that mean? Well, it's only going to hurt our liberties a little bit. Okay? You can't do that. Let's say, I could care less about America. Okay? I really could. The idea of the country. I don't care about country lines and all that stuff. That stuff's meaningless. For a moment, I'll pretend that I'm a constitutionalist American. And the whole point, of the American ideal is that the liberties are yours. No one can take them away. The government just protects them. It doesn't take them away. It can never take them away. You can't lose your liberties. Doesn't matter if it's modest or a lot. You can't lose them. They're yours. They're not the government's to have, to give you, or to take away. So no, you either live in the dangerous world or you deal with tyrants, okay? And that's what we're getting here. This Forbes article is unbelievable. That this guy's like, no, yeah, it's okay. And I concede his point that yes, most of the internet traffic around the world does happen to come through America. There's no question about that, okay? But it's the internet. Isn't that like the last bastion of freedom? I guess not. Maybe not now. It blows my mind that there are people that would somehow defend this. Okay. It reminds me, was it William Blackstone, I think, the guy who's big on common law, who said it was, I'm really butchering this, but to the effect that you let 10 guilty people go free rather than one innocent person ever get convicted. Okay, that's not the exact quote, but you get the point. And it's true. Innocence is never to be convicted. So what if 1 million guilty people get through? It is never right. It is never okay for an innocent person to pay for to have punishment for doing nothing, for having done nothing wrong. And this is, it's like, well, it's got to be monitored closely. Well, apparently it isn't. Apparently it's being monitored by one guy that can essentially say, well, yeah, 51%. I'm 51% sure that's foreign. 51%. Almost anything could be rounded up to 51%. Well, is it going to rain today or isn't it? Well, I think it's about 50-50, so I'll say 51. Yeah, it's going to rain. That is an asinine filtering system. And Obama's not saying he's going to, push anything else. The NSA certainly isn't saying they're going to push anything else. it's a disgusting thing. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more during Hacker Stories, because there's more direct information with Google, where if you think the government's just like really interested in protecting things and that the companies are so much playing ball, maybe they're not so much playing ball, but, you know, they're going to do it because the government said, hey, look, no, let us do this, but don't worry. We'll sign a new law for you that says you can't be sued or attacked by your users because of what we get from you. So it's foolproof. It's foolproof. And like Brian Barrett said, you know, it's real easy to follow the letter of the law when you're the one writing it. This is so egregious. I had a phone call today. For some of you that don't know, I actually help with sales at Free Talk Live, and I had a phone call today with someone that said he was running a VPN, and he said that my business is going to skyrocket because of this. And we've talked about VPNs on Sovryn Tech before. I've recommended everybody get one. Okay. And if you haven't yet, maybe now's your time. Okay. And there's a lot of great ones to go to. ProXPN, HideMyAss.com is a fantastic one. PrivateInternetAccess.com is a great one. You can pay for a VPN service with Bitcoin at PrivateInternetAccess.com. It's phenomenal. Okay. Do that. Give these people as hard a time as you can. Okay, that's. Everybody always asks, okay, someone reads these terrible stories, and I like to bring a lot of good news on. I think this is actually usually a very fun show, but this is just so egregious. But whenever people talk about, okay, what do we do? That's always the next question. What do we do? We give them as hard a time as possible to find out who, where, what, when, why this information was going where it was. And maybe we should all start using Twitter. Maybe we should support Twitter. I'm seriously considering that right now. Sovryn Tech does have a Twitter account. It's actually my personal Twitter account that everything goes out on. Maybe I'll switch over to that, because bravo for a company saying, no, I'm not going to take any part in this, especially since it's been around for 6 years. So they've been saying no for 6 years. How'd they pull that off? I don't know. And then again, like I said, Twitter also with the EFF, it's a 5-star company as far as privacy. There's caveats to that, but the proof's in the pudding. So that's what we can do. You can get your VPNs, okay? If you want to go really far with this and support people who are into crypto anarchy, you can look into that. Or again, maybe we should all just start using Twitter. Stuff to think about. PRISM, I'll admit, a little scary. This is Brian Sovryn. I'll be right back with more.
Are you tired of people wasting away all their precious time? Then stop using the same social media as them. Google Plus is a centralized hub for all of your Google services, your ideas, and your passions. Google Plus has a much more international user base, as to where other forms of social media center around so-called developed nations that really don't do anything exciting in the first place. Google Plus has almost no spam and has very few cat pictures of police, or anything else government-related. Stop using Facebook. You have an alternative. Start using Google Plus today.
Tech Roulette. Want to play?
Oh, I want to play. It is time for Tech Roulette, where we cover the stories that get submitted to me, be it through the email at sovryntech@hush.ai or through sovryntech.com. There's a way to submit stories there, as well as to ask questions, which we'll be doing listener email later. Also, you can get in touch with me through the Google Plus page. That's at gplus.to/Brian Sovryn. It is my personal Google Plus page. I put my own personal updates up there. It's not like some of these celebrities, I'm not saying I'm a celebrity, but some of these celebrities that, they just like put up something about their concert or some kind of bullshit. No, I put up like real updates, what I'm thinking, all that stuff. You're really connecting with me. And you can say what you want and share stuff with me there. So it's a really, really great way to connect with a show. and I really enjoy it. And Google Plus just has so many advanced options that other social media platforms don't have. So that's why I use it. Anyway, this week's story from a listener, it's a little bit of an older story. Or not that much older. It's from May 20th, 2013. It's from Bloomberg.com. And it's kind of an editorial piece, but it's true. And it's Apple just can't help innovating. Now, what does that mean? Perhaps it's not surprising that the company that redefined personal technology, entertainment, and communications would also redefine the meaning of a tax haven. A new U.S. Senate report on Apple's offshore tax strategy describes more than just a Byzantine structure of subsidiaries. It also shows that the company claims that 3 of those subsidiaries are tax residents of nowhere, not Ireland, where the subsidiaries are normally located, nor the U.S., from which a layman could be forgiven for concluding these subsidiaries are run. Senator Carl Levine, the Michigan Democrat, who chairs the Michigan, it's kind of funny how a lot of machines were made in Michigan, anyway, who chairs the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which compiled the report, summarized Apple's strategy pithily. Apple sought the holy grail of tax avoidance. It has created offshore entities holding tens of billions of dollars while claiming to be the tax resident of nowhere. Tim Cook, Apple's chief executive officer, will gamely testify before the subcommittee Tuesday morning, though it's hard to see how much good it will do him. Although the report doesn't accuse Apple of doing anything illegal, the attention it generates may obscure the distinction between shrewd tax strategy and bad behavior. That's unfortunate because the real takeaway from this seems to be that the tax system doesn't work. Asking Apple to refrain from using tax strategies it believes to be legal makes no more sense than asking the company to make its laptops needlessly more bulky or its phones uglier. You can't expect a business to outperform in one area and then constrain itself in another. I want to read that line one more time. Asking Apple to refrain from using tax strategies it believes to be legal makes no more sense than asking the company to make its laptops needlessly more bulky or its phones uglier. That's a classic line. A better response to this report, and the subcommittee reports that preceded it, is to push Congress to revisit the laws that make this possible. Levine has offered proposals on strengthening the tax rules for foreign income, as has U.S. Representative Dave Camp, the Michigan Republican who chairs the House Ways and Means Committee. Those ideas deserve attention, even if the push for comprehensive tax reform falls short. If we can't be bothered to change the incentives facing companies like Apple, we forfeit the right to be upset when they follow those incentives. Let's help Tim Cook focus his energies on making better products rather than better tax avoidance strategies. Again, that's kind of an editorial piece there, but I think it's a dead-on point in that with all these rules and regulations that all these companies have to follow, and this is interesting. This isn't something I hear a lot in anarchist and like libertarian circles. With all these rules and regulations you have to follow, how much time does that take away from your company innovating? How much time? I mean, most people just talk about the money, and that's fine because the money's important. Okay, when you can't hire more people, when you can't hire the best people for the job, or when you can't take advantage of purchasing, because one company gets the same tax rate, the actual price of their product has to be so high, and then the other company that wants to use that product can't buy it because the price is so high. I mean, it affects everybody. So the money part of it is very, very important, no question about it. But what about the thought process that requires? Even then, okay, fine, you hire these legal teams that make sure you're following all the tax rules, okay, but that's not what's going on here. Tim Cook, I mean, now he's just the name that we're using. It could have been someone else's idea in Apple, but he's the CEO, so I would assume it had to go through him at some point. But for Tim Cook to have to say, yeah, no, what I want you guys to do is not figure out to make sure we're paying taxes necessarily by the book. I want you to figure out how we can do it legally and not pay them at all. And, I guess that's giving somebody a job. And I applaud Apple for evading taxes, because where do taxes go? War, programs like PRISM that we were talking about in the last segment, to where they're spying on Americans, whether they say they are or not, that's what they're doing. Usually tax dollars, as far as I can tell, at least the bulk of them, don't go to anything worthwhile. Even if you love, and I understand this. I was the same way when I was on my path to becoming a full-on anarchist. NASA was that was like the last thing to go. Like, that was the last thing where I said, yeah, okay, that's bad. Okay, good, yeah, that wasn't good. That was where I was like, okay, yeah, I know all this stuff sucks, but at least government has NASA, right? I don't feel that way anymore, obviously. I despise NASA as much as I despise anything else that has to do with government or tax dollars. But, my point being is that, okay, where do these tax dollars go that Apple's avoiding? It doesn't go to NASA. You ask anybody, even scientists that love the government, and they will tell you that, no, NASA needs more funding. NASA needs more funding. NASA needs more funding. It's not getting a budget. We don't even have our own spaceships anymore. The United States doesn't have its own space fleet. What the hell? We invented that thing. We came up with the idea, pretty much. Yeah, Russia beat us to it, no doubt about it. And Yuri Gagarin, bravo, boy. You did a great job. But so good. Apple doesn't want to pay taxes. That's great. And it's funny. It's funny in a lot of ways. I love the humor of, Apple just can't help innovating. You know what I mean? Because Apple has innovated, especially, they innovated in the early 80s. They innovated in the late 90s. Haven't really innovated much since then, in my opinion. But they did have a couple periods where they were innovating. They were changing the world in a very literal sense. Now, in my opinion, that time has long stopped. And it's not because of the death of Steve Jobs. It's just long stopped. And so they're innovating in a new way. And what a great idea. I hope more companies start doing this. We have a subsidiary, and they don't have an address, but they're a subsidiary, and they're making a lot of money for us. I think that's pure genius and absolutely fantastic. The other part of this that is very, very funny to me is that Apple is often held up as like the shining example of a company that does it all right. That they don't, they play ball with the government, or, they play ball with the laws everywhere they go. They're like, there's even some people who, I remember when I was more of a conservative bent, yes, I know that shocks many, but when I was more of a conservative bent, it used to be commonplace to say that, yeah, liberals are the ones that use Apples, and conservatives use PCs. And there was some sense to that. That idea wasn't like totally unfounded, because Microsoft actually supports a lot of conservative think tanks. Okay, and Apple does not. Microsoft gives money to Heritage Foundation, Free Enterprise Association. I can't remember all the names of the ones that they send money to. But I used to, kind of cheer for Microsoft for being all business like that, and for, looking out for, Microsoft used to pull some tricks to not, to not pay the government. They pull stuff like what Apple's doing right here. So it's a funny contrast, because that's usually what you get, is that Apple's like, no, okay, yeah, Democrats, woohoo, and Apple is, yay taxes, and yay green technology, yay, regulation, yeah, and no, I guess not. I guess they tax evade just like every other company does in the world. And you can yell at Apple if you want about it, saying, how dare you not pay your taxes? How dare you not do this? But really, what is that saying? What kind of statement is Apple making when they're finding ways to not pay taxes anymore? And yet they're creating so many products, and have created so many products that have really brought so much wealth into the world for other people, for creative people, or have brought educational materials all around the world, have done so much to push society forward. Okay. And Steve Jobs really wanted to push society forward, no doubt about it. In fact, I love it at the D5 conference back in 2007 when he said, someone asked, I think it was Walt Mossberg, was asking him on stage, do you want, what are you trying to create, Star Trek? And Steve Jobs said, oh, just give me Star Trek. He said he was saying that is the world he wanted to create. Okay, now we can get into the socialism of Star Trek if you want. That's kind of a maybe if you wanted to actually talk about the socialism of Star Trek, send me an email, ask me the question. Otherwise, I don't think you'll want to hear it. But yeah, send me an email or talk to me on G+ or something and say, yeah, I want to hear about socialism in Star Trek, and because that's actually a very controversial kind of thing. But anyway, I'm off topic on that. So, but he's trying to create that very advanced world where everything works very well, and you spend, a lot of your life learning and exploring, and Apple was really trying to kind of bring that to the fore. I mean, that was Steve Jobs' mission in life, self-admittedly. But it's an interesting thing. And, I don't think, as far as I know, some of these tax havens, like I said, we use Tim Cook as the name just because he's the president CEO, but this stuff was being done 10 years ago. And Steve Jobs is still alive and running the company. Okay. In fact, Apple was on its 2000, let's say that'd be 2003. Apple was definitely like on that high end. I mean, they're on that rise. Much like, their star was on the rise, much like Google's is right now, as to where Apple is on the absolute decline. So good for them, because, they're going to need these tax havens if they, because their revenues, in my opinion, Apple's revenues over the next 5 years are they're not going to be there. It is an innovative company. It is a company with fantastic ideas. It is a company with a lot of brains there, some of which they've gotten rid of, like Scott Forstall. I think Scott Forstall might be the smartest man in Silicon Valley. And Apple lost him. They got rid of him. They didn't just lose him, they got rid of him, which is unbelievable. Anything Scott Forstall gets involved in is a company to watch. I'll tell you that. But anyway, Apple has tremendous things that they could probably still bring forward, but their time of their Worldwide Developers Conference, which in fact this year's is coming up in just a few days. It's coming up Monday, I believe. Their time of coming out with products that just shock and awe people, I think that time is done. It's over. So for them to want to secure their assets by using these, tax haven tricks, very unique tax haven tricks that apparently no one else has really tried before, good for them. They're going to need it. But again, what pushes someone to want to do that? Why doesn't Apple think that paying its fair share is right? I say fair share in quotes, because I think the idea of a fair share is kind of nonsense. But if you have thoughts on this, please don't hesitate to email me, or again, contact me on sovryntech.com or the G+ page. Because, again, why don't they want to? Well, because I wonder how much they realize that it's just straight up extortion. And that it's that it isn't fair. My fair share isn't fair. Why should I have to pay this much? And in fact, this is interesting because recently there have been stories where they're talking about that some of the iMacs, some of the new generation of iMacs that came out earlier this year, I believe it was, say on them made in the USA because they started making them in America again. Okay, because most of their computers, most of their products are being made overseas, and they're being made here. And so many people went on this big patriotic binge. Oh yeah, Apple's America, yeah, go Apple. And well, I guess not. I guess they're not. Yeah, America. They're more like, please find me somewhere to where I don't have to pay out millions of dollars in taxes. And, that brings me to another point quick while we're on this. If you want to okay, a lot of people will complain, and I'll complain about it too, that every year electronics companies, say at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, or somewhere, pushes a new kind of product. Like, okay, let's say in 2011, the big thing at CES was 3D televisions. In 2013, the big thing at CES was 4K televisions, which is these TVs with these ridiculous pixel counts. I mean, which is great. I don't have a problem with the technology, but it's like, wait a minute, I just spent $10,000 on a 3D TV in 2011. That was the high end. Now you've come out with another one already that, that's like, it's not even 3D. Now it's 4K. We don't care about 3D. In fact, 3D was barely represented. I think only one company represented 3D visual technology at CES this year. And so people complain and say, well, you just keep you're coming up with all this technology and it's just crap. It's like, it's just another reason you're trying to sell me an idea that doesn't actually exist. So I'll buy another TV from you this year. And that's what's happening and Apple's one of the leaders of this model in that every year they have to come out with a new product. Every year they have to update, say, a model that they have. Like there has to be a new iPhone, there has to be a new iPad, or there has to be a new Samsung something every year. Why do they have to do that? Because the companies, to break even, okay, to even just barely break even and just barely be profitable, they have to sell such and so many things a year. Okay, and why is that? Because the amount of taxes that they have to pay just to even exist. The amount of taxes, and to say nothing of the requirements for health insurance that they have to pay employees. I mean, if they want to keep people, if people want jobs, having these tax rates isn't going to create jobs. And any involvement, any legal involvement into companies all it does is hurt them. Okay, and it forces them to do things that really aren't necessary or that could, potentially like just harm the consumer. Because what's the difference between an iPhone 4S or an iPhone 4 and an iPhone 4S? What, a better camera? Siri, which doesn't even really work. I mean, the iPhone's a great product. I'm not knocking it. Okay. But they have to do that. They have to sell. They have to keep selling. It's not the company's fault. It's the fault. Not to say that big companies and government aren't in bed a lot of times. There's no question that happens. But clearly, by this article, a lot of times they're not. Okay. But they have to keep making all that money. Otherwise, they can't keep people employed because they have to pay so much in tax dollars. They have to pay so much crap for other things like OSHA and all this stuff. And just get government out of business. But good for Apple. I applaud this move. I wish I had thought of it. This is Brian Sovryn. I'll be back with more.
Are you ready?
I've never seen anyone so treated like a god in my life.
Brian Sovryn as guest co-host tomorrow night, and so that should be a good show.
On that note,
we just added Brian Sovryn.
Okay, we haven't.
Oh, is he good?
He's been in the audience.
He's certainly got opinions on things. Yes.
I'm so close to being like God. No one is above me. Okay, absolutely no one. I don't take orders from anybody, and I mean that's how much closer to God can you get?
Is there anything he doesn't do better than everyone else? Oh, that's just his way of talking. He's one of the best.
Break it down!
Catch Sovryn Tech, the show about technology and how it can set you free with me, Brian Sovryn. That's Sovryn at soundcloud.com/SovrynTech.
Think you can tell me what to do?
Wow. It's a website of the week.
It is time for Website of the Week, where I cover a website that I find particularly interesting, perhaps useful, or sometimes it's something that's just so terrible. I haven't done one of those yet, but that's coming, where I will talk about a website that is just an atrocity, and that if you actually clicked on the link in the show notes, you would be scarred forever. But maybe I won't do one like that sometime, but maybe I will. Maybe one of these times, somehow, the release of Sovryn Tech, of an episode of Sovryn Tech, will be on April 1st, and maybe I'll pull like an April Fool's joke and So watch out for that in the future. But anyway, this week, great website to talk about because it's about a subject that I am very, very, very passionate about and looking forward to, and try to support in any way I can, even if it's just verbally on this show, and to possibly try and inform others about the wonders of such a thing. But this website could do a far better job than I ever could. And this is about transhumanism or life extension technology. And it is called the Methuselah Foundation, and it's at methuselahfoundation.org. It is, obviously it's named after Methuselah, who, if in the Torah or Bible, whatever you want to call it, he lived to be 936 years old, or maybe 963. I don't exactly remember in the book of Genesis. And so he's on record, if the Bible is a record, on record, he's the longest, or he's the man to have lived the longest of anyone in history that we know of. So that's why they call it the Methuselah Foundation, and that's cool. I can dig using that sort of thing. I use satanic stuff all the time, just because it actually fits what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about libertinism or something like that. I don't believe in a Satan at all, but it gets the message across, of it's, fun to be sinful. But anyway, back to the Methuselah Foundation. Just read real quick from their site. Our mission, significantly extend the healthy lifespan of humanity. Instead of accepting the physical and mental losses associated with aging, we look for answers and solutions, not for one disease, but for the general loss of functionality and productivity that we all experience. We are a catalyst for progress, seeking, supporting, and rewarding science that extends healthy lifespan. Methuselah Foundation is a nonprofit medical charity dedicated to extending healthy human life through proven programs such as the M-Prize, My Bridge for Life, and a diverse support of key technology and research generated by companies like Sens, Organovo, and Silverstone Solutions. Together, these accelerate progress towards a comprehensive solution for age-related disease, disability, and suffering, and the Foundation expects to return powerful and measurable results to supporters within timeframes that are meaningful to them both as individuals and to society at large. And a lot of great info on the site that you can read. It has a great blog, and it pretty much also, if you're looking, okay, what companies are actually looking to allow me to live longer, because that's what this is all about. It can point you to those companies, and again, just lots and lots of information. And it is a charity, and they do, they make sure that people are getting the money, the right people are getting the money needed to hopefully put an end to, maybe one day. Not that they're saying it here, but I would, if you talk to some of the directors there, I'm sure they'd say this, but to one day maybe eliminate death in general. How about that? Or at least give us a really long life to have a good time. This is Sovryn Tech, and I'll be right back with more, but check out the Methuselah Foundation, methuselahfoundation.org. You're going to love it.
Time now for 90 Seconds on Sex with Dr. Paul.
The following is by a 27-year-old woman who is a virgin and who suffers from mental illness. As a kid, I'd have screaming tantrum meltdowns in school. I had no social skills and no friends. As an adult, I fixate, and my fixations scare people away. A cute guy once asked me what I did for a living. I started talking about finding birds' nests, putting cameras on birds' nests, and watching things eating baby birds. Well, the guy soon left. Also, I'm obsessed with Sonic the Hedgehog, and it weirds people out when I talk incessantly about the series. I can't tell if someone is flirting with me or not. I can't flirt back. I can have a good conversation with someone, but when there's more than one person around, I become overwhelmed. Most of my interaction with other people is online now. I dread the day I meet some nice guy and have to tell him I'm crazy, but I wish I could find someone to love me. When it comes to sex and relationships, I think it's important for us to appreciate and respect just how challenging social interactions can be for some of us. And for those of you with Asperger's or autism spectrum issues, I think you'll find my list of resources on sex and the spectrum to be very helpful. You can find it in the links and resources section at 90secondsonsex.com.
For more, visit 90secondsonsex.com.
It is time for listener emails. That's right, Sovryn Tech. You can get in touch with me, ask me any question, and I will answer it to the best of my ability, which my ability is pretty good. So bring it on. And you get to. There's multiple ways that you get to directly connect with this show, which I try to provide regularly. There's the Google Plus page, of course, again. There's sovryntech.com, and there's the email sovryntech@hush.ai. And this question that's coming up just on the eve of California's San Onofre nuclear plant being shut down. That doesn't have to do with anything, but I just thought I'd let you know that that's shutting down. This question is, and it's for, I have listeners all around the world. In fact, Sovryn Tech, this is episode 25, so let's lay out a few numbers real quick. As far as plays, listens, downloads, all that stuff, we are just shy of 10,000. So we've really, thank you so much for everyone enjoying the show and listening to it over the past few months. Again, we're on episode 25, which is great. But this show has been listened to in at least 52 countries, which is very, very exciting. Now, some of that, okay, now Brian Sovryn's not a fool. Some of that could be from VPNs showing me, that is from another country or something. And that's entirely possible. But all the same, if I was to market the show and I was going to show it to somebody, and to them it'd be 52 countries or maybe over 52 countries. And, that's what they believe. They wouldn't care about VPNs. So there we go, 52 countries. We're all over the place. But this listener email comes from someone who's clearly in the United States or coming to the United States, and it is a United States direct question. So if you live outside of the United States, this part you might want to fast forward through. It might be kind of boring, or you may enjoy the way I present it and listen anyway. But the question is what carrier in the United States, what cell phone carrier would you use today? And it's a great question, and it's an important question. It's a question that actually can shift over time because companies might change the way they do business, like T-Mobile recently. Again, this is all United States. Please keep that in mind. T-Mobile recently has very much changed the way they do business. They no longer have phones on contract. They have a different system where you pretty much, you pay for the phone and you get the savings in the contract because you're not paying for the phone with the high price of the contract. Okay, which is usually how all that works. It's kind of unique in the United States how that works. What you'll do is you have pretty much 4 or 5 major carriers. You have Verizon, you have AT&T, you have Sprint, you have T-Mobile, and you have U.S. Cellular. And all those big, we'll call those the big 5. The big 5, they generally, except for T-Mobile so much now, and Verizon's talked about doing this too, or talked about doing the opposite. But all of them have 2-year contract plans where you promise to pay over 2 years into this contract. Because of that, will subsidize the price of your phone. Okay. Now, one could argue that actually they're not subsidizing, you're actually subsidizing yourself because the cell phone carriers get a lot of tax dollars. And if you pay tax dollars, then you're actually subsidizing your own phone. So you already paid into that money and they're not actually saving you anything, these big carriers. But, I guess that's kind of a nuance. So this is the most popular way that people seem to get cell phones. There are minor carriers, all of which who have like prepaid plans, all of which who bounce off of the signals, the cell towers, the cell coverage area of the big 5. In fact, actually out of the big 5, U.S. Cellular has a few of its own towers, cell phone towers, but it doesn't have many. It has an affiliate program with like AT&T and Verizon and whoever else. So that U.S. Cellular, let's just go ahead and start off with that. What's the pros and cons to each of these? U.S. Cellular is really good because it does offer, it now offers an unlimited plan, meaning unlimited data, unlimited talk and text, unlimited, all that. Everything's unlimited. And it has the same coverage area as Verizon. Okay, so U.S. Cellular, to a lot of people, I'll say this. If a few months ago, if U.S. Cellular offered that unlimited plan, I would be using U.S. Cellular. Now, their selection of phones doesn't even come close to what everybody else offers, to what, Sprint or Verizon or AT&T or even T-Mobile offers. But they do have the Galaxy Note 2. They have some Motorola phones. They have the Galaxy S4. In fact, they got the Galaxy S4 before Verizon did. So they get some big name phones, and that's okay. So U.S. Cellular is pretty good because the coverage area is great and you get that unlimited data plan. Now, why is that unlimited data plan so important? It's important and it's unique, not unique because Sprint has an unlimited data plan too, but it's important because Verizon and AT&T, which have the greatest coverage around the United States. I mean, even, I'm in New Hampshire, I'm in the Free State Project, and in New Hampshire, I mean, you go up north, like you go to Pork Fest, which is coming up next week. It's coming up very fast, or, a week and a half, whatever. When you go out to Pork Fest, last year, the only thing that worked up there was Verizon, and AT&T, I think, barely worked. And maybe some Sprint kind of worked, but really that was it. Nothing else was working up there as far as cell signal because, there's just, it's, way up by the White Mountains, and there's not a lot of cell coverage up there because there's not a lot of people living up there. So that's the thing. So US Cellular is really, really good because it has all that great coverage. Okay. But it, and it has that unlimited data plan. Okay. T-Mobile. Now T-Mobile has an unlimited data plan. All right. That's great. All the big five have 4G now, just so you know. If you're wondering about 4G, all the big five have 4G. In fact, I think they all have. T-Mobile might not have 4G LTE, but everybody has 4G at least out of these. So we're not even going to use that as a consequence. T-Mobile is pretty good because you can get it uses what's called GSM. It's where U.S. Cellular, Verizon and Sprint use CDMA as a cell phone signal. Okay. They use GSM, and GSM is like the global standard for cell phones, for cell phone signal. And because of that, you can buy what are called unlocked phones, unlocked cell phones. You have to buy them at full price. You're not getting these in a 2-year contract thing, but you can buy unlocked mobile phones. Like you can buy unlocked iPhones and use them on T-Mobile, even though T-Mobile originally didn't offer iPhones. You could buy unlocked, you can buy unlocked Galaxy S, like the Google edition, Galaxy S4. You can buy an unlocked one of those and use that at T-Mobile. So there's advantages to T-Mobile, and their coverage is pretty good. It's pretty comparable to Sprint, but it doesn't compare it to Verizon or AT&T. So then let's go on to those two, Verizon and AT&T. Both of them, Verizon and AT&T, they do not offer an unlimited data plan unless you've had if you've had a plan with them for a few years, back when they did offer unlimited data, then you could still use unlimited data with them. It's what they call grandfathered into a plan. But generally they do not offer that. The best between those two, now Verizon has the best coverage, AT&T is pretty close. Okay, Verizon has the most 4G. In fact, as far as I know, I think they're the only one in New Hampshire that offers 4G LTE in a couple of areas. So Verizon's got the best cell phone signal, okay, but Verizon is the worst company of the bunch. for a multitude of reasons. We talked about early in the show how Verizon is, I mean, everybody's doing it, but Verizon is willfully giving away user data to the government. No problem. They're like, yeah, sure, here, take this. Verizon is also behind the 6 Strike program for internet usage, which has nothing to do really with cell phones, but again, it is the same company. So Verizon, the Big Red, as it's called, is kind of an evil company. But if they offered an unlimited plan right now, I'd be on it. I'd use Verizon. I'll admit that right now. So I'm knocking Verizon, but at the same time, I totally understand why people use it, especially in New Hampshire. And their selection of phones isn't that great. Verizon as well. And they don't allow for the unlocked phones, so you can't bring in a phone from another carrier generally into Verizon. They don't have any of like the Nexus phones that are really popular, like the Nexus 4. They do have the Galaxy Nexus, but they don't offer really anything else. AT&T, on the other hand, again, just about the same coverage as Verizon. And they also, now they don't have unlimited plans, but their plan is actually pretty good. They have like this, it's not a share everything plan like Verizon has, but it's kind of similar in that what you can do is you can pay for 15 gigabytes, say, of data, okay, and then you could pay for talk and text and everything, but you could pay 15 gigabytes for data for a month. And then you could use that 15 gigabytes of data on every device you have, okay? Because bear in mind, cell phone carriers now offer tablets, not just phones. And they even sometimes they offer computers, like the Chromebook Pixel, which is a beautiful computer, has Verizon 4G LTE built into it. Okay, so with this plan, this is where AT&T kind of shines, because you can get unlocked phones and unlocked tablets, unlocked computers. You can buy a computer from Lenovo, and they'll put in an AT&T SIM card. So it works with AT&T. And then you can pay for this 15 gigabyte plan or 10 gigabyte plan, whatever you want. And you can use that data across all of them. It all pulls from one pool. And that's a really great service. So if you had to have that amazing coverage, you just had to have it, I would probably go with AT&T. Just because of your options. All right, U.S. Cellular, if you don't need the tablets and you don't need the unlocked devices, probably go for U.S. Cellular now, because that has great coverage and it's unlimited. But what do I use? I do use Sprint. Why do I use Sprint? There's a few reasons. The biggest one is that at the time when I was getting a new phone, it was the only one that offered unlimited data. And believe me, I need unlimited data. When you use something like Google Play Music, where you're streaming all your music from the cloud, I use, on average, I think I probably use close to 20 to 30 gigabytes of data a month. I also torrent from my phone. I do as much work as possible I do from my phone. Okay, so I need unlimited data. That's the whole attraction to smartphones for me, is that internet on the go, that ability, that constant media and internet ability on the go. And if I have to be concerned, oh boy, am I using too much data, that defeats the purpose for me. So they have the unlimited data. They have excellent customer service. Okay, I can't speak so much for the other companies on customer service, but Sprint has excellent customer service. They have a great selection of phones. And I mean, you can get like the iPad with them and all that stuff. You can't get any of the Nexus tablets with them, unfortunately. I think they're like the #1 green company in the country. I like green technology. I like the idea of that sort of thing. Recycling is a controversial issue, but I like, I can get behind that. If it's an extra, if it's a perk, it's there, that's great. So what's the best carrier for the United States? It's a toss-up between U.S. Cellular and Sprint. If you need the iPhone, you're going to go with Sprint. If you want Android, maybe you could get away with U.S. Cellular. I think they're great. So hope that answers it. I'll be right back with more.
Spike.
Launch.
In the third age of mankind, an age plagued by an evil empire that seeks to destroy humanity, it is our last, best hope for peace. It is Babylon 5.
All fighter squadrons launched.
Get us out of here. Return fire.
Freeze them!
Watch Babylon 5.
You can watch Babylon 5 and experience the greatest show in television history. See the entire series completely free by going to thewb.com/shows/Babylon 5.
Software of the Week.
Time for Software of the Week, where I cover a piece of software that tickles my fancy, or that I find useful, or maybe that I think might not be ready yet, but it could change the world. Any reason, it's Software of the Week, and it's where we talk about software. And this week, this is kind of interesting. What this week's Software of the Week is Opera Next. And Opera, as in the web browser Opera. And Opera Next is, Opera for years. I love Opera. I think Opera has been, for really since the late 90s, has probably been the best web browser out there. Chrome, if Google didn't integrate its services into Chrome so much, I'd still use Opera. That's how it is. Chrome is obviously, I think everybody would agree Chrome is probably the fastest and best web browser out there. And again, with the integration with Google services and the popularity, the rising popularity of Chromebooks, Chrome has just taken over the world. It really has. Internet Explorer has got nothing. Firefox is great if you're into hacking and privacy. But Chrome is really the all in all, and everybody's really developing for that. And in reality, it's becoming its own operating system, which is incredible. But Opera used, it's been big on standards. Okay. So it's always been very solid and reliable. Even more so than Firefox, because Firefox got to a point where it became very experimental. And Opera used to use what's called the Presto engine. Each browser uses its own engine, or at least a hybrid maybe of engines. Like Internet Explorer uses the Trident engine, so does Maxthon. Actually, Maxthon lets you choose between engines. Firefox uses the Gecko engine, and Chrome used to use what it called WebKit. Safari also uses WebKit, but Chrome then switched to Blink, which... Now, with Opera Next, which is the new iteration of Opera, they have ditched the Presto engine and are now using Blink, just like Chrome. And let me tell you, when you download Opera Next, now it's not available for Linux yet. It's available for Mac and Windows, not for Linux yet. But when you download Opera Next, you're going to think it's Chrome. It looks just like it. In almost every way, other than in like the top left corner or whatever, there's a little, to get to the menu, there's an Opera, there's a big O in a little tab thing. But it looks very, very, just on initial style, it looks exactly like Chrome. And it is using Blink, or at least it's going to be using Blink. They started developing it with WebKit. But Blink is becoming a part of it. And there's a lot of changes that they made with it. It's very, very fast. In fact, it has something called off-road mode, which isn't necessarily new to Opera, but off-road mode is if you're in an area where the internet sucks, you can turn that on, and it makes the images a little more pixelated, and it tries to give you as much data as possible with as little signal as possible. It's a great, great feature. It's one of the things I always loved about Opera. So that's there. They decoupled Opera Mail, and I think they also ditched... Opera used to have its own torrent software where you could torrent within Opera. I think that's gone. And again, Opera Mail, Opera Mail's still out there, but it's not a part of the Opera web browser anymore. So they dumped a lot of the extras. Take that as good or bad. I'll agree. I love the off-road mode and that it operates like Chrome. That gives me like a really nice kind of a hybrid feel for it. But I do miss all the things that Opera could do. In fact, Opera really was like its own operating system. It was its own little world for years, for a really long time. So I'm kind of sad to see that go. But check it out, Opera Next. Let me know what you think about it. You can go to the Google Plus page or wherever and just give me some feedback. I'd be interested to hear. So Opera Next, check it out.
What does freedom mean? Tune in to LRN.FM to find out. LRN.FM is the Liberty Radio Network, a collection of live talk radio and podcasts, all coming from a principled pro-liberty perspective. LRN.FM show hosts aren't left, right, or conspiracy kooks. You can tune in 24/7 to LRN.FM via your phone, computer, satellite, and more. Listen free anytime at LRN.FM. That's LRN.FM.
Brian! Stop playing those video games!
Just a minute, Mom.
Game Talk.
It is time for Game Talk. Arguably my favorite part of the show. I do enjoy me a video game here and there. This week, I want to actually open up with something very, very interesting. I mean, I was absolutely blown away by this. Someone found, and this was a couple months ago, but someone found a Sega Pluto. I know, right? Awkward silence. What the hell's a Sega Pluto? Sega Pluto was a prototype. It kind of existed around the Saturn time. In fact, we got a little bit of a story. I'll read it quick here from The Verge. After 14 years of sitting on a piece of gaming history, someone claiming to be a former Sega employee is breaking the silence, posting what he claims to be photos of the long-rumored Sega Pluto prototype console. The machine is a modified Sega Saturn. It even has a Saturn logo, and you can go to the show notes and see a picture of this thing, with a built-in 28.8 kbps, what we used to call a 28.8 modem, connection for web browsing and email. The shell of the device has been majorly redesigned with a flip-top lid on the optical drive instead of the push-button mechanism on the Saturn, and the poster named Super Magnetic describes it as a beast. Definitely the heaviest console I've ever held in my hands. The Pluto reportedly runs, although region incompatibility has stopped him from testing an actual game. And his lack of landline also makes it impossible to test the netlink functionality, at least for now. But if you're thinking about tracking down a Pluto prototype on eBay to play your old copy of Knights, forget about it. There are only believed to be 2 in existence. And then there's an update. If there really are only 2 Pluto consoles in existence, it would appear that they're now both accounted for. A Destructoid reader says he owns the other model, which was apparently bought for $1 at a flea market around 5 years ago. Now, the Pluto, if you want to look into the history of that, you can, but it was a successor to the Saturn before the Dreamcast came out. And it was interesting. I mean, it had a lot of features about it, but I'm going to leave it a mystery. You can look it up and check it out and do some reading about it. We're going to talk about, in a future episode of Sovryn Tech, we're going to talk about another rare gaming console that was made by Apple in the 90s. Oh, man. Yeah, wait till we get to that. Anyway, let's get to our main story. So that's exciting. Sega Pluto found. But our main story is kind of an odd one. And I actually talked about it. I also, for those that don't know, I also host on Sunday's Free Talk Live with the lovely and hyper-intelligent Stephanie Murphy and the absolutely beautiful Mark Edge. And we did talk about, Mark actually found this story, and we talked about it a little bit. And this is from Polygon. LAPD confronts Call of Duty Ghost statue, intense standoff. Ghost is a character, for those that don't know. I mean, the article is going to explain it, but Ghost is a character from the Call of Duty franchise. And I guess this not real character caused a real problem. Late last night, the offices of Los Angeles-based independent game studio Robotiky were stormed by the Los Angeles Police Department after a curious designer pressed the building's panic button, studio founder Robert Bowling told Polygon. The 911 response, the 911 response ended in a tense showdown with the life-size statue of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2's Simon Ghost Riley, which the police mistook for a gunman. Earlier today, reports circulated that the studio had been the victim of a swatting prank in which a third party tricks law enforcement authorities or emergency services by providing details of a made-up threat, triggering an emergency response dispatch to the target of the prank. Swatting pranks are not limited to 911 calls. Swatters can spoof a victim's phone number, obtain and use a victim's personal information, or hack phone and computer systems. Bowlings clarified that it wasn't a prank, but the mischievous mischievousness of an unnamed designer that brought the LAPD to the door. Our studio is equipped with a panic alarm in case of an armed threat, which was installed yesterday, Bowling said. One of our designers, who shall not be named, pressed it on his way out because apparently when boys find buttons that they are unsure of, their first instinct is to push it. Bowling said the panic alarm was installed as a precaution to protect his team, as game developers receive their fair share of death threats. He noted that Robotiky hasn't had any issues with threats, but it is something Bowling is familiar with from his days at Infinity Ward. And that's actually, some people might say, what? Why would video game developers get death threats? This is very true. There are lots of people, Rockstar is actually infamous for having to deal with this because they get death threats from Christian groups. Yeah, I guess they give out death threats. And it's true. And they've gotten from Islamic groups, a lot of video game companies, particularly, Call of Duty, I could believe, where there's a lot of, like, say, Russian or Islamist bashing that goes on in these games. I think that's fair to say. And they get death threats, obviously, from people of those ethnicities. Saying, wait a minute, I'm not like that. Why, or how dare you insult Allah, things like that. So that does happen. So that's legit. Anyway, we'll keep going with the story. So after pushing it, everyone went home for the day, leaving their lonely studio head to receive the assault of their actions, he added. At 7:10 p.m., 4 officers arrived at the front of the building, only to find that there was no way to get in from that side. As they moved around toward the back where Robotiky's entrance is located, the officers spotted Bowling's life-size statue of Ghost standing at attention with his gun at the ready. So they made entry. Now, this is and you can look this up in the show notes, this is a very realistic-looking stand-up. It's a statue. Might as well be a statue. And the gun it holds in its hand looks totally legit. Everything looks good on it. So from a distance, even probably just a few feet, admittedly, as funny as this kind of is, as you can guess the story's going to be, admittedly, I don't blame him because it looks real. It looks damn real. Let's see. I was in my office when they arrived and saw them coming up our stairs, referring to the cops. Guns drawn, Bowling said. They yelled for me to put my hands up and walk towards them slowly, then took me into custody and out of the studio until they cleared the rest of the rooms and floors. Bowling said about 15 minutes later, the officers emerged laughing. They had mistaken Ghost for a real threat and had nearly taken him down. The photo above was taken from Robotiky's security cameras and shows the moment the cops approached Bowling's office. Once they realized Bowling was neither a threat nor a hostage, discussion fell to Bowling's line of work, and the ordeal ended with a round of video games using the office's NES controller table. Bowling said there was no harm done and he was not fined for the false alarm. They chalked it up as a mistake, a miscommunication, or misdirected prank. Until we reviewed the security footage and saw our designer's curiosity to be the cause. So an update, the LAPD did confirm that they indeed did respond to an alarm call at Robotiky with 4 police officers Thursday night. So the story is true. And there's kind of a funny tweet from Bowling here. The LAPD just stormed Robotiky with guns drawn and detained me as they cleared the building. I blame Ghost. So, it's a funny story. Is there police ineptness here? Not really so much, because the system was installed by Bowling to call the police, when there was a problem, okay, or at least to contact 911. So, that was designed to happen. It's not like, at first when you read the tagline for this, you can't help but say, what, the cops drive by and they saw a ghost in the window and so they ran up with guns. That's not exactly how it happened. But it is funny to see, because they have shotguns. These guys are ready to take somebody down, when they see Ghost. And like they said, they were going to take him down. But fortunately, whoever pulled the prank, it's a funny prank. And I'm glad the police actually had good humor about it. Kudos to them. And for having the wherewithal. Because I think often enough, we like to think that the police are trigger happy. And clearly in this instance, they weren't. They may have actually had, I don't want to say this, but I'll say it, a right to be. Because it just was, like I said, this statue looked so real. The gun looked good. Everything looked good. And you got a guy in there sitting down. Bowling's in there sitting down. It looked like a hostage situation. I could definitely see where it would be crazy, but amazingly, everything worked out just fine. And there was no fines to go around because, if it was a prank, they like to fine people, and that didn't happen. And everybody ended up sitting around playing video games. Look at that. We can get along with cops by playing video games instead of pointing guns at each other. Beautiful. I'll be back with more.
Are you searching for a mouthwatering, all-natural, sweet and sticky treat? What if I told you it was also made by a chef who believes in freedom, just like you? You're not dreaming. This is real. Head over to mandrick.com. That's MANDRIK.com. There you'll find Georgia's famous baklava in classic and dark chocolate flavors. To those with special health needs, Georgia's famous baklava also has a treat for you. Golden delicious, low-carb, gluten-free almond cookies. Order with PayPal or Bitcoins. In just a few days, your sweet treats will await you right at your doorstep. One more time, that's MANDRIK.com for Georgia's famous baklava. Hacker Stories.
Time for Hacker Stories, where I cover stories that have to do with hackers, security, you name it. And this week's story is relative to what we opened the show with, which was about PRISM, which is essentially the NSA collecting data from companies like Microsoft, Yahoo, Google, Apple, a lot of the big names. Twitter, interestingly, is not a part of PRISM as of yet. And PRISM's been going around for 6 years. And this is where things get confusing. Now, the story that we have here is from the RT, or from RT. I always say that. I say the RT, and Stephanie always gets a bit of a chuckle out of that one. But it's from RT.com. And what we have is judge orders Google to comply with warrantless spy requests. Now, here's the thing. PRISM, okay, we'll get into the article. But PRISM says that Google is already giving information to the NSA and to the government, essentially. So what's the need for, why is Google saying you can't look at our stuff without a warrant? But then they're like, here, have all the information you want through PRISM. So it's kind of confusing, but let's read the article here. Legal battle between Google and the United States Department of Justice is heating up as the internet behemoth challenges the Obama administration's warrantless requests for personal user data. Google has been opposing the National Security Letters, or NSLs, documents sent to telecommunications companies in secret that compel them to provide information about subscribers to the government. The Justice Department does not need to warrant or subpoena the information, instead relying on a Patriot Act provision that allows Federal Bureau of Investigation officers around the country to request data by stating only that it is required for national security matters. Because NSLs are filed under seal and in almost all cases are accompanied by a gag order that restricts the recipient from speaking about the request, little information is publicly known about the process. On Friday, CNET reporter Declan McCullough reveals that Google's attempt to shut down 19 NSLs it received ended with a federal judge saying the company must honor 17 of the government's requests. McCullough says, a federal judge has ruled that Google must comply with the FBI's warrantless requests for confidential user data, despite the search company's arguments that the secret demands are illegal. McCullough went on to say that the decision was made following a closed-door court session held May 10th in San Francisco, California. According to his sources, U.S. District Judge Susan Ilston rejected Google's attempt to modify or throw out 19 of the NSLs they received, while leaving the opportunity for 2 of the requests to be squashed. It wasn't a complete win for the Justice Department, however, McCullough added, noting Ilston all but invited Google to try again by saying the company failed to raise arguments specific to the 19 NSLs at issue. Google will likely narrow their complaint to more specifically contest the request for those 17 orders, while Ilston asked the government to provide further information prior to making a decision about the other 2. Only hours after McCullough wrote at the closed-door hearing, he published a second article revealing a separate installation in the long-standing fight between the feds and Google. As it turns out, the recent meeting of attorneys in San Francisco, conducted in secrecy, wasn't the only legal episode involving the two as late. McCullough wrote that the Justice Department filed a lawsuit against Google in New York on April 22nd, asking a federal judge to force Google to comply with the request. Immediately after the FBI's New York field office sent an NSL on April 22nd, the Bureau filed a petition to enforce in Manhattan federal court on the same day, an abrupt and arguably undiplomatic move that Google says did not give it a chance to either comply or exercise its legal right to seek judicial review, he wrote. McCullough added that Google asked for that lawsuit to be rejected at the time, citing the case happening in San Francisco. Judge Ilston refused their warning, according to CNET, because the government's issue is more squarely raised in the New York legislation. Judge Ilston ruled in March that NSLs are unconstitutional, but the Department of Justice filed an appeal immediately after her decision. Until that matter is settled, Google is expected to respond for the still standing request for user data pertaining to the 17 accounts presented by the DOJ. Wired reported previously that 300,000 NSLs have been sent out since 2000, and just this year, Google began publishing limited information on the federal requests it receives. Google said they received letters for between 5,000 and 9,000 user accounts between 2009 and 2012. So Declan McCullough, fantastic reporter for CNET. I've met him personally, and just all around great guy, very knowledgeable on these things, and he really cares, and he's a genuine libertarian, I'll say. I don't know if he's an anarchist, but he is a libertarian, and he does care about people's rights. So, that's a guy reporting amazingly on such a high-profile story. That's one of the good guys. Now, this story came out before everything with PRISM. Okay, so again, I'm very, very confused, because here's Google telling the FBI, no, you need to bring a warrant. Okay, but then they're saying, no, we're not taking any part in PRISM. Okay, but then, according to the reports, yes, they clearly are working with PRISM. So it's a very confusing thing. Now, as far as, I talked earlier about Twitter and with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, how they're one of the couple of 5-star companies that they rated as far as user privacy. Now, Google is a 4-star. So they're pretty good, and they're certainly better than Apple. If the world is in a battle between Google and Apple on the technology front, Apple is only a 2-star company and Google is a 4-star. So take that, for what it's worth. And I can't help but think, it just feels like shenanigans. Like they're playing this game to make them look a certain way, but then they're just letting it all happen anyway. And I've heard that. People have told me that, Google claims to be, saying no to these warrantless requests, but as soon as someone rebuts it, they just lay down and they let it happen. And maybe they do, and I hate to say this, but what is Google to do? And that's the point that Declan McCullough was actually bringing up in this article, was that the judges, the legal system won't even give Google time to react legally with how the system is set up. Now, the importance to this with being a part of Hacker Stories is that when you take into consideration this sort of thing where the U.S. government is saying, and government is the butt of the gun, or, government is the threat of the gun. It'll use both. And with that in mind, would the government tell Google, hey, do this or else? Yeah, I think they would. And so I don't get so mad at some companies, but there's companies that seem to try and fight at least, but I don't know what's going on here. I'm honestly, when I look at PRISM and I read this article, I am so confused as to what's going on with Google. And I love Google. I'm a Google fanboy, no doubt about it. But this doesn't look good. This really doesn't look good for them. And to think, it's interesting, at 300,000 NSLs being sent out on users. And, this is an area where, and in future weeks, there's a great article going out around now about entrepreneurship and libertarian entrepreneurship and crypto anarchy. And maybe we'll talk about that next week. But if this kind of thing concerns you, where the government is looking at, despite what legal actions a company as big as Google does, your privacy cannot be protected by them, then maybe you need to start considering, okay, I'm not going to use Google anymore. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that in today's world, that's going to be kind of a shock, to like, oh, I'll Google it. Well, no, you won't. So, this comes back to, and it's kind of something we talk about a lot on Sovryn Tech. It comes back to this privacy versus usage or privacy versus convenience issue. And I'm definitely more on the convenience side. I'm way on the convenience side, actually. But if you have these privacy concerns, look, we've got companies lying back and forth, and it's all about government nonsense. So government's really the problem. But, this is a mess. This is just an absolute mess. What do you do with this kind of information? Who's telling the truth? The government always lies, but I don't know. Anyway, interesting article. I'll be back with more Sovryn Tech in just a moment.
Oh, yeah.
This is Stephanie Murphy, Sovryn Tech producer. You may know me from this show, but did you know that I have my own podcast? It's called Pork Therapy. Pork Therapy is a bit different from other shows. We cover current events, big ideas, and even relationship issues, all through the lens of how we can get more freedom in our lives. Oh, and you'll love Sex and Science Hour. Join me on my website, porktherapy.com. That's porctherapy.com. Now back to Sovryn Tech.
What are you doing? I can't believe I caught you again. Jesus doesn't approve of this little habit of yours.
I know, baby, I know it's wrong, but it feels so right.
Well, it ain't.
But I've been doing it since I was 12 years old.
It's nothing but a sinful perversion of nature, if you ask me.
But, baby, I don't ever want to stop looking at tech websites, new gadgets, video games, software, or any of that stuff.
Well, then I'm leaving.
Okay. Bye.
Pick of the week.
It's time for Pick of the Week, where I cover various, whatever I want to pick. I could do a movie, I could do a TV show, I could do software, I could do some kind of hardware product, or just some kind of product, or comic books, music, a new album or something. Which, by the way, there's a new Black Sabbath album out, and if you haven't heard that, oh man, give that a listen. That is not my pick of the week, but that is amazing, to put it simply. This week's pick of the week, I actually already mentioned Star Trek once this episode. Apparently, it has become a running theme that in every episode I mention Star Trek at least once. And I've already done that this week, but I'm going to talk about Star Trek again. Actually, last week's episode, Dr. Stephanie Murphy and I, we talked about Star Trek and our thoughts on it, and the impact it had on us. And this week, I'm going to fine-tune it to something that I found to be absolutely amazing. Imagine if you're kind of a sports fan, and even if you're not, I'm not a sports fan by any means. Was when I was a lot younger, but imagine that like somehow you could turn on the TV and watch Babe Ruth go at it one more time, with the Yankees or whoever. Imagine, I don't know, picture something from way back that just suddenly, hey, there's a new one on. Like there's a new game on, and look, or say it was football, and oh man, Joe Montana's passing ball again. That's great. And if you can just try to envision like that feeling that you would get if you saw that, of going back, especially, I'm 32 years old, and like say with Joe Montana, I'd have to go back to about 15 years to where he would have been throwing for the Kansas City Chiefs at the time. I would have to go back to that time, and just seeing that alone would just bring you back to like this moment. Everything, time would just literally almost shift, and you just feel this warmth of when, maybe you'll feel like things were simpler. A lot of people say that sort of thing. Or, when the future seemed bright, or, stuff like that. Either way, a very positive moment where you were kind of still experiencing the world anew. And I know that all sounds very dramatic, but believe me, this lives up to every ounce of that hype. My pick of the week this week is Star Trek Continues. What this is, it's a fan-made Star Trek. It is based on the original series of Star Trek, the one with William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy, Kirk and Spock. And it is an attempt really at a season 4. Now, this has been tried before, and they were all valiant tries, but none of them, like there's one called New Voyages and Phase 2, but none of them live up to this. None of them. They might come a little close, but not by that much. Star Trek Continues the first episode. There's a couple of vignettes that are out there. You can go to StarTrekContinues.com to check these out. But Star Trek Continues, they just came out with their first episode, their first real episode called The Pilgrim of Eternity. And it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. This is Kirk and Spock, obviously all new actors. Okay. But it is Star Trek. I had zero problem with believing that I was just watching episode number 80. I had no problem with it. It seemed, yes, all the actors are different, but by the looks of things, that was the only thing that was different. And I was genuinely transported in my head to being like 8 years old again. And seeing Captain Kirk do his thing. Forget Star Trek Into Darkness. I'll probably never even talk about that. There's no point. This is Star Trek. And it was absolutely magical without being cliche. Cliche in the sense, Star Trek in and of itself is kind of cliche, right? Or at least it might have even invented the idea. But it wasn't like cliche to Star Trek itself. It was just pure, beautiful Star Trek. And the acting, okay, so fine. What's different, though? What's different about it? And it was the actors. Again, that was really the only thing different. The effects look good, of course. They're updated for today's tech, and they all looked fantastic. The Enterprise looked smashing, to be quite frank. And the actors were all great. In fact, Scotty, the guy playing Scotty, is Chris Doohan. It's James Doohan's son, the guy that played Scotty. He sounds just like him, looks very much like him. It's incredible. Definitely, no doubt about it, even though I didn't mind the change of actors, it really helped to have, to have him there. Like, that gave it a lot more legitimacy, I got to admit. But Captain Kirk is being played by Vic Mignogna. I hope I got that name right. I might have it wrong. But he doesn't look anything like William Shatner. Who does? Okay, you're not going to get that with anybody. But he pulls off such a great Kirk. The facial expressions, the nods. William Shatner is so unique in and of himself with a lot of the motions he does and the way he acts. And Vic pulled it all off. He pulled it off way better than Chris Pine does in the new Star Trek movies. He made it happen. It is so good. And they even got the guy who played what this is. This is kind of a sequel episode. It's an episode that references the episode Who Mourns for Adonis, where they go to a planet and they find the god Apollo. So it's kind of like an Ancient Alien thing that Star Trek did before there was an Ancient Aliens, really, which is impressive. And they find the god Apollo, and they find him again, and they actually got the original actor to play Apollo, as an older guy. And so the whole episode is about that. It all takes place on the starship, which is good because you want to prove it'd be easy enough. Like a lot of the Star Wars fan movies, fan films, they will spend a lot of time out in forests, because forests are very plentiful, and forests are plentiful in, Star Wars. And so, it makes sense to film there, but, that way you don't have to actually like make a set. But in this case, I think they made the right move in having everything taking place on the Enterprise itself. Though they do go outside of it. This is very impressive. They get in in EV suits, and they get out, of the Enterprise, and they have to like get some stuff off the ship. So it didn't shy away from doing kind of big effects, which is also impressive on their part. But just I can't express it enough. The music was perfect. The cues were perfect. The lighting was perfect. Everything was perfect. Actually, and they even added a new character, which is a great touch. They did a few nice touches. I don't necessarily want to give one of them away, but they reference some technologies that later become a big deal, like say in the Next Generation. They bring on a new. This isn't really giving away anything, but they bring on a new character who she's a ship's counselor, much like you have in the Next Generation with the character of Deanna Troi. And real quick on that, the computer voice for the Enterprise in Star Trek Continues is Marina Sirtis, the woman that played Deanna Troi. Now, what's so funny about that is because, this is like 6 degrees of separation or whatever, but Deanna Troi, the character, is the daughter of Lwaxana Troi, right? And Lwaxana Troi is played by Majel Barrett Roddenberry. And Majel Barrett Roddenberry is what? The voice of the computer. So you kind of have a mother-daughter connection there. I think it's hilarious. But anyway, so it was really cool. They brought in the idea of the counselor, so that way, if one were to watch this as like a season 4 of Star Trek, if say you watch Star Trek chronologically, you watched, the original series, you'd see this natural progression to where when you start to watch The Next Generation, you're like, oh yeah, ships have counselors. They have psychologists essentially, or psychiatrists, whatever. And I think that's great. And she's a stunning woman. Michelle Specht, she is absolutely beautiful, and does a great job. Again, all the acting is top notch. There's no piece of acting here really that I felt was kind of under the board. The guy who plays Chekhov didn't get a whole lot of lines, but if you watch the vignettes, he's kind of there and he does great. The woman that plays Uhura does a fantastic job. The guy who plays Spock does a fine job. I don't know how you can, like, Zachary Quinto, it's amazing. I'll give Zachary Quinto this. He plays Spock in the new movies. You just so instantly believe he's Spock, like you don't even think twice. As to where the guy playing Spock in Star Trek Continues he does fine, but it's not like standout, as to where like Vic playing Captain Kirk is just a standout performance all the way around. So, again, everything's there. The music's right. The set production is perfect. The effects are really, really good. They're really good. Certainly look better probably than anything that was on the Next Generation way back when, thanks to computers, of course. And, again, its real credit is just in the fact that you have no problem believing that this is just a new episode of Star Trek. Like even the name of it, The Pilgrim of Eternity, sounds exactly like something that would have been done in season 3. Even the dialogue, the episode even ends with, this is great. The episode ends with like a talk between the Doctor, Dr. McCoy, Spock, and Kirk, just like pretty much every episode did, and here's something you haven't seen in Star Trek in a long time. There's actually a moral to the story. Fancy that. Star Trek hasn't pushed a moral in, 15 years? It's been forever. And so it has everything. I don't know how often they're going to produce these things. I hope they come out pretty fast. I wish they could make money, because they're making better Star Trek than Paramount or CBS or anybody could even dream of making. They're making the real deal here. You can go to StarTrekContinues.com, check it out. You can watch it on YouTube or Vimeo. I've got it linked to in the show notes. I mean, I don't know, there's so much that could be said, but there's so much that doesn't even need to be said. You just got to see it and be amazed at that you now have new Star Trek. And if you're like me, I quote Star Trek a lot. Like I'll quote something like Kirk says. And there's quotable moments in this. And so I'm so excited. I get to quote new Star Trek. I mean, come on, how many people how many Star Trek fans don't do that? So many people, you'll even hear the stunning Mark Edge on Free Talk Live. He'll say, he'll quote like Star Trek 2, he'll say, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one, which fortunately was a statement that was corrected in Star Trek 3, where Kirk said the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many, which is obviously more accurate. But anyway, check this out. You may cry, but that's okay. This has been Sovryn Tech, episode 25. We've done it for 25 episodes. Now we're on the count to 50. And make sure to check the show out on G+. Check me out on G+. G+.to/Brian Sovryn. I will see you next week.
This has been Sovryn Tech. Visit us at sovryntech.com. That's SOVRYN tech.com. There you can connect with us, see more of what you've heard on today's show, and catch our podcast feed. Sovryn Tech is open source. We encourage you to share. Later, nerds.